Injections lead to wrong antibodies responding to COVID, part 3. Okay, let's pick it up where we left off. That phenomena that we discussed could help explain the expert baffling chart that was in the Cleveland Clinic study. I discussed this study last week and posted in one of my videos, the conclusion of which was that those injections increase the risk of reinfection. Now, just a few months ago, there was an Atlantic article referring to the now famous Kaiser Foundation study, described what it understatedly called a troubling trend, and I quote, "For the first time, a majority of Americans dying from the coronavirus received at least the primary series of the vaccine. 58% of coronavirus deaths in August were people who were vaccinated or boosted, a continuation of a troubling trend that has emerged over the past year. As vaccination rates have increased and the new variants appeared, the share of deaths of people who were vaccinated has been steadily rising. In September 2021, vaccinated people made up just 23% of coronavirus fatalities. In January and February this year, it was up to 42%. Now, 23%, 42%, now 58% of deaths. And there is no reason to think that this trend has peaked yet. This is exactly what you would expect to see if the IgG4 theory that we've been looking at is correct. In other words, the increasing death rate in boosted people could be explained by the D researchers finding that both IgG1 and IgG3 antibody types are being steadily replaced in the vaccinated by the IgG4 type. Now, if you go back to the original chart that we were talking about, you'll see that the IgG1 15.5% and IgG3 42.2% together did most of the virus fighting work, 57.9% in total, while IgG4 was nowhere in the list of neutralizing antibodies at all. Simply put, this antibody class shift is bizarre, unprecedented, and a very troubling sign that vaccinated folks, especially repeatedly boosted ones, are somehow losing their IgG1 and specifically IgG3 response in favor of IgG4. It's not just the reduction of the two effective neutralizing antibody types either. IgG4, since it is designed for allergies, doesn't remove the foreign protein so much as teach the body to tolerate or ignore them. There's a good reason for tolerance. Allergens don't replicate like viruses. Allergens are a totally different kind of threat. With allergens, the body doesn't need to go crazy fighting allergens. It can take a slower, more measured response. Specifically, whereas IgG1 and IgG3 types are pro-inflammatory, which means they trigger the body's immune system, high alert system, the IgG4 type is anti-inflammatory, which means it tells the immune system to stand down, which is the opposite of what you really want when you're fighting an infection. The D researchers explained that after the third booster, IgG3 levels fell almost to zero, while IgG4 levels became the second most dominant antibody type. And I quote, 10 days after 2 immunizations, anti-spike specific antibodies of the isotypes IgG1 and IgG2 and IgG3 were readily detectable, whereas anti-IgG4 antibodies were completely undetectable. IgG2 levels were remarkably lower than IgG3 and IgG1 levels. Intriguingly, 210 days after the second immunization, the level of spike-specific IgG4 antibodies exceeded the lower limit of quantification in the sera of about half of the vaccines. The levels for all other isotype types dropped significantly as expected from the overall anti-S response. While IgG1 was still the most dominant isotype, IgG3 levels fell below the lower limit of quantification. After the third immunization, the amounts of IgG1 were elevated again and reached levels as measured shortly after the second vaccination. Notably, a marked increase in IgG4 antibody levels was observed after the booster immunization in nearly all vaccines. In some individuals, IgG4 became the second most abundant isotype among all the anti-S antibodies. Anyway, I know there's lots there. The result was that injection-produced antibodies that don't work as well as natural antibodies at clearing the virus. And I quote, blood sera taken after the third vaccination and normalized to the amount of anti-spike antibodies yielded significantly lower phagocytic scores than sera from the same donors after 2 immunizations. Phagocytic scores refers to how effective antibodies are at neutralizing a virus. Phagocytosis is the process whereby killer cells eat virus proteins flagged by antibodies, thereby killing them. Lower phagocytic scores means that IgG4 antibodies in vaccinated people were less effective at removing the virus than the IgG1 plus the IgG3 types in the uninjected. I know, folks, it's a mouthful. There's lots of information. I strongly encourage you, watch these videos over, check those charts out. Other studies appear to confirm a malfunctioning immune response as well. A November 22nd study published in Frontiers in Microbiology was titled, Conserved Longitudinal Alternations of an Anti-S Protein IgG Subclass in Disease Progression in Initial Ancestral Wuhan and Vaccine Breakthrough Delta Infections. Wow. Anyway, like the D study, the researchers found higher ratios of IgG4 were associated with more severe disease, and people who had high levels of IgG4 antibodies relative to IgG3 had worse clinical outcomes. Simply put, they got sicker. On the bright side, they also found that the antibody ratios between injected and uninjected had stabilized 6 months following injection, suggesting the potential for recovery. Anyway, I put a link to that study in the notes as well. Next, a July study published in the New England Journal of Medicine was titled Duration of Shedding of Culturable Virus in SARS-CoV-2 Omicron BA.1 Infection. The data from the study showed that boosted subjects cleared the virus more slowly than unvaccinated people, and once again, I put the link in the notes. The study data showed the share of boosted subjects who were still contagious, 31%, at day 10 was over 5 times more than the share of still contagious unvaccinated subjects, 6%. In other words, out of 100 boosted people who catch COVID, 33 were still have live transmissible virus on day 10, whereas out of 100 unvaccinated people, only 6 test positive on day 10, more than 5 times fewer. So, not only are the boosted dying in increased numbers as recently reported in a variety of stories, but they are carrying the virus longer. Not sure about you, but I'm thinking this is less than ideal. The unknown is the most troubling part. Nobody has any idea what happens after artificial disruption of a large part of the population's immune response. We can reasonably assume we'll see increasing COVID infections for boosted folks. Another troubling possibility is that other viruses could begin to evolve to take advantage of the reduced IgG3 response in boosted people, making new variants targeting boosted people. Another disturbing possibility appeared in another research article published in August in the Yemen Journal of Medicine titled Immunoglobulin G4 Related Disease, a Narrative Review. And again, I put the link in it, but here's the first paragraph from the article. Immunoglobulin G4 related disease, IgG4-RD, is a new and evolving immune-mediated disease characterized by a focal or diffuse organ infiltration by immunoglobulin G4 bearing plasma cells, which, if left untreated, leads to irreversible fibrosis, organ dysfunction, and death. IgG4-RD can affect any organ in the body with a variety of clinical features that mimic malignant, infectious, and inflammatory conditions, making diagnosis difficult. Therefore, a high index of suspicion is necessary for the early detection of this disorder to avoid irreversible damage and death. Anyway, lots there, folks. This baffling new syndrome is little understood, but diagnosis includes measuring serum IgG4 levels, which appear high in people who have the novel disease. So once again, it appears sustained high IgG4 levels may be a bad sign. Fortunately, the novel syndrome remains rare and there's no evidence connecting it to the interventions. Not yet, anyways. In summary, the bad news is that we have no idea at all the result of IgG3 suppression and IgG4 promotion might be. But the good news is that we're finally learning more about the actual mechanisms behind the problems. That's good news for accountability, and it's especially good news for vaccine-injured people because it is also the first step towards sorting out effective treatments. While you may disagree with me, not all intervention recipients were willing participants. Some of them are themselves victims. They were manipulated or coerced into taking something without informed consent, a drug pushed by a myriad of reassuring government agencies that should have been able to trust. Why? Because they paid their hard-earned tax dollars to not only fund those agencies, but generously compensate the bureaucrats running them. We need to have them realize the grave injustice that was done to them so that they can not only ultimately get the assistance they need, but equally important, assist the rest of us who resisted to bring accountability to all those responsible. Anyway, thanks for watching this series. I please encourage you to check out all 3 of them. I know there's lots of information, there's lots there, but it is one of the most important video series I've done. It's really answers a lot of those questions that have been lingering. Anyway, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe if you haven't done so. You can check out some of my past videos. You can also follow me on my Rumble or my Locals account. I thank you for hanging in with me with all this data, and I will see you next time.